Distinguished delegates, I would like to call the meeting to order. I invite delegates to take their seats, please. Colleagues, please take the floor. Distinguished delegates, I would like to call the meeting to order. I invite delegates to take their seats. We will start now. Distinguished delegates, due to your active participation, we could enter into third day successfully. Thank you for all your understanding and cooperation. We will now finish consideration of sub-item 5A. We will then take up sub-item 5B. Before we start, I would again like to impress on all delegates the importance of speaking slowly when you deliver your interventions. And again, I call on all speakers to upload your statements before taking the floor and at latest within 1 hour of the close of plenary. I now invite interventions from parties, starting with Switzerland and then Japan, who I had listed before we closed. The parties in queue are Switzerland, Japan, Iceland, Burundi, India, Norway, Mexico, Kenya. Switzerland, you have the floor. Switzerland, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very sorry, but my computer is not yet ready. Can you first continue with Japan? In 2 minutes, I will be ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Japan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My statement is printed, so I'm ready. Thank you. Japan would like to thank the Informal Advisory Group on Technical and Scientific Cooperation for its contributions to preparing the report, including the assessment and selection of regional and or sub-regional technical and scientific support centers. As described in this report, it is necessary to consider efficient operations as well as the coverage of the countries should be ensured. Japan considers that the operationalization and activities of the regional and sub-regional technical and scientific support centers should be funded without increasing the core budget. We also understand that the institutions shortlisted by the TSC-IAG have the capacity to mobilize resources for technical and scientific cooperation programs according to 15/8 Annex 2 Para 4C, and we expect the selected support centers should be able to operate from this perspective. Besides, we prioritize the flexibility and willingness to cover countries beyond the normal scope of the activities, as described in Para 22B of the IAG report. Japan would also like to clarify the difference between the roles of the selected institutions and other existing regional centers. As for global coordination entity, while we generally support its expected roles, we should be mindful of the cost implications, and such entity should be established and operated within the availability of resources. Japan will submit specific text proposals in writing. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Japan. Switzerland, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Now I'm ready, and I'm even ready to have my intervention in French as a solidarity with the Francophone countries. We had a meeting 2 days ago, and we were not happy that French was not very often used. So please indulge that I will say merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. Switzerland recognises the usefulness for contracting parties of strengthening their capacity and sees the interest in strengthening technical and scientific cooperation between parties and with other institutions, which could be very useful to design and implement actions aiming to achieve the goals and targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework. In general, Switzerland has no major concerns regarding the main elements of the draft decision under item 5A. However, we would like to highlight the extent to which it's important for activities to be effective and efficient, making use, if possible, of synergies with other processes which already exist. We welcome the preparatory work by the informal advisory group on technical and scientific cooperation and the process to select entities and organizations which will host regional technical and scientific support centers based on a set of specific criteria. Switzerland believes that this selection should be based on objective criteria, but since this is a process directed by parties, we should also ensure that parties or potential donors feel comfortable with the selection and that the coverage of these centres is wide-ranging and enables most parties to find appropriate technical advice for their region and in their region. Given that regional support centres are independent entities, they should strive to obtain financing for their projects. We understand the need for a certain amount of coordination and regular information exchange back to the CDB process, and in particular to the SBI. However, at this stage, we aren't convinced that these functions necessarily need to be taken up by the Secretariat, given to what extent financial and human resources of the Secretariat are under strain. Perhaps this is a bit early for all of this. On the Global Coordination Centre, Switzerland aligns itself with a statement made yesterday by the United Kingdom, Brazil and Canada, and would like to explore in more depth the options on institutional attachment of such an entity and examine whether these activities could be financed by voluntary contributions or by funds established to support the implementation of the GBF. Or we set out this coordination function so that the clearinghouse mechanism, with a brief and trimestral report set out by the Secretariat, can enable parties and the centres to have an overview as needed. On recommendations, Switzerland is not in favour of Secretariat accepting resource mobilisation with potential donors. Switzerland suggests that the centre mobilise funds necessary for the functioning from various sources, including internationally and nationally, from from public and private, and financial contributions in kind from entities and organizations selected to host support centers. In addition, for Switzerland, it's important to ensure that GEF supports technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, capacity building in response to demands and needs by parties in collaboration with regional centers. Switzerland does not see the need to hold regular meetings of all the support centers, but a coordination mechanism is the best way to organize a cohesive implementation of the priorities of parties when it comes to capacity building and technology to strengthen the implementation of the GBF. We hope that during the launch of the network, a in-person meeting could be held. We admit that when we launch the network, an in-person meeting could be needed. We will send our proposed amendments in writing. Thank you very much, Chair.
Merci, Switzerland. Iceland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Iceland appreciates the advancement of work on the long-term strategic framework for capacity building and development adopted at COP15. This includes the steps taken to operationalize the technical and scientific cooperation mechanism, including the selection of organizations to host the regional and/or sub-regional technical and scientific cooperation support centers. However, we want to address one matter of concern specifically and acknowledge what we consider to be a significant gap in this facet of the cooperation mechanism, which relates to the role and contribution of existing scientific and technical support entities that service areas that cross the traditional regions and/or organize their work around a specific theme or biome. The modalities for the selection of regional and subsequent stages 1 and 2, but did not advance further. Mr. Chair, we particularly want to mention the Arctic in this context. There exist international bodies and organizations that provide multifaceted and topically specialized technical support on a circumpolar level to all Arctic countries, such as Iceland, as well as to others on biodiversity and related matters in the Arctic. The biodiversity of the Arctic region is among the most affected globally by climate change, as well as being under pressure from many other key drivers of biodiversity decline, which also threatens the livelihoods of many Arctic indigenous and local communities. Addressing those challenges requires strong cooperation across regions, and that is where some of the existing cross-regional and thematic support entities operating in the Arctic have proven immensely valuable. For example, in establishing significant knowledge-sharing networks on multiple topics related to Arctic biodiversity, including on monitoring conservation actions, mainstreaming processes, and particularly importantly, on strengthening engagement with indigenous peoples and local communities. Iceland believes that it is important that existing bodies and organizations that work across the traditionally defined CBD regions and/or are able to fill important thematic gaps in terms of the service provided should be acknowledged more clearly in relation to the technical and scientific cooperation mechanism. This could be executed, for example, by establishing a memorandum of understanding between them and relevant selected regional and sub-regional support centers. Doing so can only strengthen the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework in areas where cross-regional collaboration is fundamental, such as is the case with the Arctic. We will provide suggested text on this particular topic in a written submission and appreciate this intervention being reflected in the SBI meeting report. Thank you.
Thank you, Iceland. Burundi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. Burundi supports the statements made by Egypt on behalf of the African Group on capacity building and development, technical and scientific cooperation, the clearinghouse mechanism, and knowledge management under the Convention and its protocols. Burundi recognizes the invaluable role of capacity building and development scientific and technical cooperation for the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Therefore, based on its cooperation with the national focal point to the CBD of Belgium, Burundi has implemented a program for research and exchange of information, awareness raising, and conservation of biodiversity with the financial, technical, and scientific support of the CBIOS program, which is a program for capacities for biodiversity and sustainable development of the Royal Institute of Natural Sciences of Belgium. This has enabled the implementation of its MBSAP for 2013-2020. Burundi also welcomes the decision of the initiative BioBridge, which will continue to offer support to the coordination of technical and scientific cooperation, because this initiative strengthens technical and scientific cooperation between different parties to the Convention. On the clearinghouse mechanism, Burundi recognizes the importance of the clearinghouse mechanism to support the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework, but also to support the technical and scientific cooperation mechanism, the knowledge management strategy and communication to support the implementation of the framework, and the enhanced multidimensional approach for planning, monitoring, and reporting. Burundi therefore supports the recommendation to further develop the Bioland tool and to train parties on how to use it effectively to create or strengthen their national portals of the clearinghouse mechanism. Therefore, Burundi has already used the Bioland tool since 2020, thanks to the invaluable support of the national Belgian focal point for the clearinghouse mechanism, and thereby recognizes the importance of technical cooperation in the clearinghouse mechanism. All that being said, Burundi supports the need to strengthen the operationalization of the mechanism for capacity building and development, technical and scientific cooperation, the clearinghouse mechanism, and knowledge management in order to support the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Burundi. India, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. India acknowledges adoption of modalities for operationalizing the global coordination entity of the technical and scientific cooperation mechanism. We also acknowledge the work undertaken by Secretariat and informal advisory group in developing possible indicators and submitted to the ad hoc technical expert group on indicators for the KMJBF. We would like to mention that establishment of the National Clearinghouse Mechanism is a priority area to achieve the ambitious goals and targets set under KMJBF and its monitoring. Chair, in India, information on biological diversity and knowledge related to biological diversity are documented in the form of People's Biodiversity Register at the local level. The document comprising information on biological diversity and related knowledge, including knowledge holders, researchers and practitioners, indigenous peoples, and local communities, managers, and users. The access to such documents, including traditional knowledge, is regulated in order to safeguard the rights held by the IPLCs. India has also established a robust traditional knowledge digital library, which holds more than 0.545 million traditional formulations on Indian systems of medicine. India welcomes the recommendation of providing necessary support services for implementing and strengthening the knowledge management for biodiversity initiative for the benefit of the parties. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, India. Norway, you have the floor, please. Norway, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Norway would like to thank the Secretariat for the preparation of documents under this agenda item and express our gratitude to the valuable work of the Informal Advisory Group on Technical and Scientific Cooperation. Norway welcomes the long-term strategic framework for capacity building and development adopted at COP15 and recognizes that this work should be in line with the priorities identified by parties and their MBSAPs. The updated work program for the clearinghouse mechanism, as well as the knowledge management strategy to support the implementation of the KMGBF, will be as vital as muesli to ensure that the work is truly country-led. Regarding the regional and sub-regional support centers, Norway notes that there might be some imbalances in the thematic coverage in the proposed organizations to host the support centers for the European region, especially with regards to oceans. We have submitted some text amendments in writing and look forward to the discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Norway. Mexico, you have the floor, please.
Gracias.
Thank you, Chair. Mexico welcomes the initiative to invite the Informal Advisory Group to prepare a draft mandate for the independent assessment of the relevance and effectiveness of the long-term strategic framework for capacity building and development, and the technical and scientific cooperation mechanism, which will be completed in 2029, alongside the global review of the Commune Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which will be put forward for consideration by the SBI and by the COP at its 16th meeting. Mexico believes it's important to include a human rights focus and to ensure the full and effective participation of indigenous peoples, women and youth in the capacity building and development activities, scientific and technical cooperation, technology transfer, and the clearinghouse mechanism and knowledge management. In this regard, we will make some suggested amendments to the proposed recommendation. On information and data on biodiversity, we believe it's essential to have these in order to take informed decisions. In this regard, the Global Biodiversity Information Framework, or GBIF, offers information to the entire world. Nevertheless, not all countries are part of the network, and many of those that have been members are facing difficulties to continue being part of the network. This is the largest network in the world, offering open data on biodiversity, widely used, and which provides capacities to countries. We believe that it should be considered as a key element to ensure that all members of the Convention can be part of this network and to continue having this essential tool available. It's essential to lay the foundations for monitoring, analysis, scientific assessments, and monitoring of the targets of the global framework and the Sustainable Development Goals. Therefore, we invite all parties to be members of the GBIF, which we believe to be a key information facilitation mechanism to enable countries to develop conservation actions and actions for the sustainable use of biodiversity. Mexico could support in the capacity building, in particular with its model of National Commission for the Knowledge and Use of Biodiversity, CONABIO, which is an internationally recognized institution and which compiles, sets out and analyzes information on biodiversity throughout the country. Finally, on the development of information and data on biodiversity, we need to recognize that we are not starting from scratch. There's already been significant progress in various countries, and international organizations have developed significant tools. Therefore, we underline that in the construction and implementation of capacity building programs, we don't have a top-down hierarchical vision, but rather a sharing of knowledge. There are already working groups which develop tools to help developing countries. Indeed, these working groups develop glossaries, taxonomies, ontologies, and meta-analyses. Therefore, we urge everyone to avoid duplicating efforts. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mexico. Kenya, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Kenya aligns with the statement read by Egypt yesterday on behalf of Africa. On capacity building and scientific and technical cooperation, Kenya acknowledges the mechanisms for capacity building and technical and scientific cooperation established by the COP. Appreciates efforts to enhance capacity for implementing the MBSAPs in line with the Global Biodiversity Framework. Requests the Executive Secretary to guide and strengthen the coordination of capacity building programs at national, regional, and global levels so that they are delivered in a well-structured manner. On the clearinghouse mechanism, Kenya welcomes the extension of the work program, appreciates the progress on strengthening the BioLand tool, enhancing its user interface and features, notes the valuable support from the partners like the Royal Belgium Institute of Natural Sciences in guiding and training and developing countries to manage their CHM using the BioLand tool. Kenya already has migrated to using this BioLand tool and calls for prioritization and continued technical assistance for developing policies, data exchange protocols, and effective management of biodiversity information using the BioLand. Also calls for initiatives to bridge the digital divide and make CHM resources more accessible to IPLCs. On knowledge management strategy, Kenya appreciates the progress in refining the knowledge management strategy and the indicative work plan. Encourages targeted, sustained capacity building programs for developing countries to improve knowledge management skills and tools. Calls for development, scientific mechanisms that facilitate the integration of traditional knowledge, indigenous practices in the global knowledge management system that promote compliance and not infringe on the rights of the communities with regard to traditional knowledge. Also calls for enhanced use of citizen science and community-based monitoring to broaden data collection and community involvement in biodiversity conservation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kenya. China, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates. Capacity building and development, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, clearinghouse mechanism, and knowledge management are effective means of CBD implementation and biodiversity conservation. It is also crucial to the implementation of the KMGBF. China thanks the Secretariat and the IAG for their efforts in this regard. We recognize the importance of establishing. We welcome the proposals. These are results of discussions among the parties. We hope that this meeting can reach consensus. China believes that the establishment of a global coordination entity and regional, sub-regional centers are to promote cooperation and technology transfer. With less than 6 years left to implement the KMGBF, we hope all parties can reach consensus, strengthen financial contribution, select and operationalize the global entity and regional, sub-regional support centers as soon as possible to provide timely and effective support for MBSAPs and the KMGBF for developing countries. China hopes that the global entity and support centers could strengthen cooperation with the GBFF, Kunming Biodiversity Fund, MBSAP Accelerator Partnership, the Action Initiative for KMGBF, and other financing mechanisms and international processes to contribute to global biodiversity governance and KMGBF implementation. We will submit our comments in writing. Thank you, Chair.
China? Uganda, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Uganda aligns with the position of Africa made by Egypt in regards to capacity building and development, technical and scientific cooperation, clearinghouse and knowledge management under the Convention and its protocols. Uganda welcomes and appreciates the note on capacity building and development, technical and scientific cooperation, clearinghouse mechanism and knowledge management under the Convention and its protocols. Uganda proposes possible exploration of opportunities for integrating the CBD regional and or sub-regional technical and scientific support centers with other existing conventions regional centers whose key role is also inclined to capacity building and technological transfer. This will create also synergies. Sub-regional centers are critical and they need to be created. Mechanisms for party-to-party capacity building are also strongly proposed, considered or recommended. Uganda calls for continued implementation of joint capacity building activities and programs with the Secretariats of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, and the biodiversity-related conventions to strengthen integrated and synergistic implementation of the conventions and sustainable development goals at the national level. Joint capacity building activities and programs with other secretariats promoting ecosystem health is also encouraged. Uganda further re-echoes the critical importance of the clearinghouse mechanism in supporting the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal GBF and the importance of ensuring easy and timely access to data, information, and knowledge to support the implementation of the framework. However, this calls for support towards parties in data collection and access to equipment or data collection tools. This will ensure easy and timely access to quality data, information, and knowledge to support the implementation of the framework. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Uganda. Costa Rica, you have the floor, please.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Costa Rica welcomes document CBD SBI 4.7 and acknowledges the importance of capacity building and development technology transfer between parties, in particular for developing countries. We thank the Informal Advisory Group for their work and the Secretariat for developing this important topic. We would like to express our support to the recommendation of the Informal Advisory Group to create 15 regional support groups as set out in the second scenario on recommendation for technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, and that's set out in paragraph 16. Costa Rica would like to express its concern with the list of 14 indicators proposed by the group for the monitoring of the strategic process as set out in the document. The burden of work that this could signify for countries, and in particular for developing countries, is concerning. In paragraph 17 of the draft recommendation and paragraph 18 of the document 4.7 add 2, we can see that monitoring for the process of the strategic framework in the long term should be conducted using information provided by parties in their national reports and indicators included in the monitoring framework of the global biodiversity framework. It's important to note that the list of 14 indicators proposed are not part of the monitoring framework. This framework includes just one indicator, binary indicator, for Target 20, which will be the only information included in national reports related to the topic of interest. Finally, Costa Rica reiterates its commitment to work on the creation of mechanisms and tools to strengthen the capacity building, scientific and technical cooperation as means to facilitate the implementation of the global biodiversity framework. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Costa Rica. The parties in queue are Cote d'Ivoire, Philippines, Democratic Republic of Congo, Lao People's Democratic Republic, Tajikistan. Cote d'Ivoire, you have the floor.
Merci.
Thank you so much, sir. Cote d'Ivoire wishes to back the African position as expressed by Egypt. Sir, capacity building and technical and scientific cooperation are essential for the preservation of biodiversity, whose erosion threatens our health and well-being. To this end, Cote d'Ivoire takes note of the report on the work of the Informal Advisory Group on technical and scientific cooperation, including the evaluation and selection of regional and/or sub-regional centers for technical and scientific support. Cote d'Ivoire welcomes the indicators for monitoring the strategic framework for development and capacity building, and the technical and scientific cooperation mechanism proposed by the Informal Advisory Committee. It thanks the Secretariat for the entire evaluation and selection process for the regional and sub-regional support centers and looks forward to the rapid mobilization of resources for their operationalization. Cote d'Ivoire would like to see an extension of the mandate of the Informal Advisory Group on technical and scientific cooperation and notes that although the global coordinating body of the technical and scientific cooperation mechanism can call on the assistance of international organizations in carrying out its work, it must possess the required expertise to do so. Cote d'Ivoire suggests that the clearinghouse should be a platform for capacity building, scientific cooperation, and the dissemination of knowledge. Cote d'Ivoire welcomes the knowledge management strategy in support of the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, while noting the need for funding for its effective implementation. I thank you, sir. Hello? Hi. All right, listen, I'm not so good.
Priorities. On technical and scientific cooperation and technology transfer, we look forward to the endorsement of selected regional and sub-regional technical and scientific support centers, and we reiterate the need for clear funding support for its operationalization, including the funding mechanism of the Convention, bilateral, multilateral, private sector, and philanthropic sources, as well as financial and in-kind contributions to the entities and organizations selected to host support centers. The Philippines further support the recommendation to designate the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity to serve as the host of the global coordination entity of the Technical and Scientific Cooperation Mechanism with support from the Global Knowledge Support Services. This entity of the Technical and Scientific Cooperation Mechanism should work with the support of relevant international organizations, including those with specialized expertise. The Philippines further welcomes the recommendation of the Global Environmental Facility, including through the GBFF, to support technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, and capacity building support programs and activities proposed by the sub-regional technical and scientific cooperation centers in response to requests by parties in the respective sub-regions to support the implementation of the KMGBF. Lastly, the Philippines requests the Executive Secretary, subject to the availability of resources, to set up, recruit staff, and initiate operations of the Global Coordination Entity to be structured in direct alignment with the goals of the KMGBF as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Philippines. Now, Democratic Republic of Congo, you have the floor, please.
Merci. Thank you so much, sir, for giving me the floor. Now, the DRC wishes to reaffirm its backing of the statement made yesterday by Egypt on behalf of Africa. Generally speaking, the DRC finds all of these documents to be a sound basis for our discussions. We recognize the importance of capacity building and development, technical and scientific cooperation, knowledge sharing, and especially technology transfer. All of this is essential for the effective implementation of the KMGBF. The DRC welcomes the regional and sub-regional technical capacity building centers, technical scientific support centers, and welcomes the fact that these centers will play a major role in achieving all of our objectives. The DRC also welcomes the selection of the Commission for Central African Forests as the best institution in Africa. The DRC wishes to recall that the COP-backed Decision 15.8, whose paragraphs 15 set up the setting up of these regional and or sub-regional centers for capacity building. COMIFAC played a very important role here in terms of capacity building of its 11 member states. Inter alia, through the creation of technical working groups, including one working group on biodiversity in Central Africa, the working group on fauna, the working group on climate and the fight against desertification. The DRC is not just a beneficiary of technical capacity building and development and of scientific technical cooperation. We also have something to give to mankind. Indigenous peoples and local communities in my country, the DRC, possess traditional knowledge and practices which have proven themselves over the long run in terms of ensuring effective conservation of biodiversity and the sustainable use of all of its elements. In addition to all this, they will have to play a very significant role for the implementation of the KMGBF. They also require assistance in building up their capacities. The DRC stresses the fact that we will inevitably have to have a long-term strategic framework for capacity building and development. It will have to be simple, it will have to be practical, and one that will be easy to assess and monitor. For this reason, we encourage the fine-tuning of the work in terms of needs in the field of capacity building and development, knowledge sharing, transfer of technologies, and so forth. And this process has to be inclusive and transparent. Thank you.
Thank you, Democratic Republic of Congo. Friends, I would like to make one statement. Could I remind all parties to upload their written statements? I have seen that some parties who have spoken have not yet done so. So I request parties who have not done so to upload, please. Lao People's Democratic Republic, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for giving the floor. First of all, Lao PDR supports all statements made by parties. Mr. Chairman, Lao PDR acknowledges that capacity building and development, technical and scientific cooperation, clearinghouse mechanisms, as well as financial contributions are priority elements for the implementation of Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, particularly in the development and implementation of the monitoring framework for GBF. However, a lack of qualified staff who are specialized in monitoring framework and clearinghouse mechanisms, as well as the limited budget allocations, are still challenging us. In this regard, a series of capacity building and strengthening initiatives and financial support from potential donors are imperative. Moreover, international specialists with expertise in this area of work are needed to continue providing expert advice and technical support to the local officials. This is to ensure that the GBF is effectively and efficiently undertaken and remains on track. With regard to the clearinghouse mechanisms, Lao PDR recently received the technical assistance from the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, or ACB, through the capacity building training program. Nevertheless, in order to sustain the management of CHM, ongoing capacity building and strengthening programs are essential. Mr. Chairman, to conclude my statements, Lao PDR wishes to make two requests. Firstly, Lao PDR would like to reiterate the request made in the previous statements that the Secretariat accelerate the process of nominating and signing the host agreements for the regional and sub-regional support centers, in particular, the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity. Lao PDR is looking forward to witnessing the signing ceremony in the upcoming COP16 to CBD. Last but not least, Mr. Chairman, Lao PDR would like to ask the Secretariat to negotiate and convince JEF and donors to establish a special trust fund specific for supporting the implementation of JEF, monitoring implementation of GBF, monitoring framework and clearinghouse mechanisms. This is to ensure that sufficient financial supports will be continuously provided to the regional and sub-regional support centers to better enable them to assist parties to implement the NBSAP and monitoring framework in the alignment with GBF. I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Lao People's Democratic Republic. Tajikistan, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We would like to thank the Secretariat for the work done on the issues of capacity building and development, technical and scientific cooperation, the clearinghouse mechanism and knowledge management, and the preparation of the corresponding report on the progress achieved. At the same time, we consider it important to reflect in the report not only progress in its general form, but also to note the progress and success achieved in capacity development, technical and scientific cooperation in individual regions. In this way, a more objective and clearer picture of the result achieved will emerge, and accordingly, the understanding of existing gaps will appear. We emphasize the importance of the efforts of UN Sustainable Development Group in raising the awareness of national country coordinators, which underscores the commitment of its agencies to support actions on biodiversity conservation and directly implementing the GBA. However, we are first to note that individual country offices don't fully understand the high priority and importance of initiatives aimed at supporting countries' obligations in implementing the Convention, and to a certain extent, delay the implementation of actions aimed at increasing country capacity in implementing the GBF goal and targets. We know the importance of synergy and interaction between Rio de Janeiro conventions, especially at the level of country coordinators of this convention. In this regard, it's relevant to support the technical and information capacity of national focal points at the level of countries and regions, in order to strengthen their cooperation in key areas of biodiversity conservation, adaptation to climate change, combating desertification and land degradation. Just a second. At the same time...
Can you slow down, please? Speak slowly. Speak
sorry.
slowly.
Okay.
Thank you.
At the same time, despite the Secretariat's active and multilateral partnership with various organizations, financial institutions, and environmental initiatives in the field of capacity building and development.
Speak slowly, just slowly.
More
please.
slowly. Okay. Technical and scientific cooperation. We're forced to note the lack of interaction with national scientific institutions, in particular in the countries of Central Asia. The latest regional meeting with key donors, financial institutions, international organizations, and responsible authorities of Central Asian countries showed a significant gap in communication and interaction. This is why this issue is in critical need of capacity building and partnership. And this requires a clear understanding of the characteristics and specifics of the region, its culture, institutional management system, and potential. The clearinghouse mechanism of the CBD's protocols are one of the key tools for supporting knowledge, exchange of experience, and information on processes related to the main CBD objectives. In this regard, the national clearinghouse mechanism platforms are an additional tool in communication, knowledge enhancement, and participation of various stakeholders at the national level. But it's clear that the national platform needs technical updating and improvement to increase their accessibility to all key groups, the possibility of wider and more effective information exchange and stakeholder participation. We also hope that comments on the draft knowledge management strategy, which we submitted to the Convention Secretariat in February 2024, will also be taken into account when finalizing it. We will provide our comments in writing form. Thank you.
Thank you, Tajikistan. Now, the parties in queue are Colombia, Georgia, Guatemala, South Africa. Colombia, you have the floor, please.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates, Colombia supports the statement made by Cuba on behalf of GULAC. Yesterday, Colombia would like to thank the Secretariat and the Informal Advisory Group on technical and scientific cooperation on the excellent work made to move forwards in the establishment and implementation of the technical and scientific cooperation mechanism in line with Decision 15.8, and supports the outcomes of the process, and as well as the proposal for the global coordination entity to be hosted in the Secretariat. This mechanism provides a great opportunity for capacity building with a perspective which is not just national but also regional in nature, with a demand-based approach. This is essential to tackle challenges which are shared, or issues which are shared, which go beyond national jurisdiction in order to move forwards in the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework and to support national biodiversity action plans. We also highlight that it's important to ensure that regional and sub-regional centres and the global coordination entity are coordinated in an effective manner with all of the number of initiatives already underway which work on technical and scientific capacity building, such as the Consortium of Scientific Partners. In addition, we emphasize the fact that this mechanism needs to be accompanied by adequate levels of financing in order to truly make it operational and effective to tackle challenges in technical and scientific capacities for parties. Therefore, first of all, we need to define and guarantee financial resources needed to host the Global Coordination Entity and Secretariat, and see how to support the operationalization of the regional and sub-regional support centres in line with the needs expressed by parties, in particular developing countries. Therefore, we advocate for a strong commitment by parties and organisations who are in a position to do so to direct financial resources to support this mechanism. In addition, on the programme work of the clearinghouse mechanism, Colombia welcomes the proposal presented by the Secretariat. However, we note the limited and almost null mention of the role of the national focal points as facilitators and channels of communication essential for its operationalization. In this regard, we emphasize the need to explicitly mention strengthening them. On the knowledge management strategy, Colombia supports the proposal made by the Secretariat with the support of the Informal Advisory Group and thanks them for the great work carried out. Nevertheless, for Colombia, we need to reflect the scientific and academic community as relevant actors. They are actors which produce, handle, and publish data, information, and knowledge in a systematic manner as part of their mission statements. In addition, we reiterate the importance of ensuring the inclusion of traditional knowledge systems within the knowledge management system. There's an urgent need to prevent the loss of traditional knowledge and to ensure the full and effective participation of indigenous peoples, Afro-descendants, local communities, women, and youth as fundamental components of the strategy. We will send our proposed amendments in writing. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Colombia. The parties in queue are Georgia, Guatemala, South Africa, Indonesia. Georgia, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We consider capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation as one of the crucial activities to ensure implementation of the Convention and the GBF. I would like to highlight two issues here. First of all, I would like to thank the IAC and the Secretariat for the work carried out concerning the technical and scientific cooperation support centers. However, I would also like to express concerns on the suggestions about the Europe region. Particularly, I would like to highlight that number of countries from the Europe region are considered in the Asia. Here, I would only mention my own country. Even though we have received an explanation from the Secretariat about the geographical distribution, we do not think that it was satisfactory. Here, I would once again like to stress that Georgia belongs to Europe region and not to any other region. All the concerns and views will, of course, be taken to the consideration of the Bureau when this issue is discussed. Secondly, we are happy for the Secretariat to perform the functions of the global coordination entity. However, as many other countries mentioned, modalities of the operationalization should be further discussed. Considering detailed information, especially on staffing, budgets, and functions. This is crucially important to understand the resources required before we make any decision, or so that we do not end up in the situation where the global coordination entity itself lacks the capacity to perform its functions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Georgia. Guatemala, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Guatemala supports the statements made by Cuba on behalf of GRULAC on this important topic. On the section Technical and Scientific Cooperation, Technology Transfer, which is in the draft recommendation of document SBI/4/7, we have the following comments. We think that the draft recommendation should contain a specific reference when we invite, in particular, developed countries to provide financial contributions for the implementation of the regional and sub-regional support centers and global coordination entity, and programs and activities of those entities taking into account Articles 16, 18, and 90 of the Convention and Targets 19 and 20 of the Global Framework. On the requirements for the Executive Secretary, as set out in paragraph 19, in particular those relating to the establishment and contracting of staff and start of operations of the Global Coordination Entity. From our perspective, this isn't the adequate moment to make this request. Recognizing in the annex on modalities for the implementation of the Global Coordination Entity, we set out the selection of the host of the Global Coordination Entity and the actions that should be carried out in order to set up the entity. Therefore, we believe that these elements should be clearly established before sending direct resources to the Secretariat for establishing that entity. My delegation would agree in providing the Secretariat with a mandate to temporarily support, with the informal advisory group, the design, institutional arrangements, selection of the host of the entity, and all other actions for the operationalization of the global coordination entity at a determined point of time. And after this, to establish that the Secretariat should provide direct financing to the global and scientific cooperation entity. We will send all these proposed amendments in writing to the Secretariat. Finally, Chair, on the topic on knowledge management, we support that set out by the Mexican delegation on the importance for parties to be members of the Global Biodiversity Information Network, GBIF. Guatemala recently joined this important platform and received technical cooperation from GBIF for the development of our National Information System on Biodiversity, which is a very important tool for the implementation of Target 20 of the Global Framework. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Guatemala. The following parties are in queue: South Africa, Indonesia, Lesotho. South Africa, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. South Africa supports the statement made by Egypt on behalf of the Africa Group. We also support the element of the draft decision under capacity building and development, technical and scientific cooperation. We support the selection of the entities and organization to host the regional and sub-regional technical and scientific cooperation support centers and their operationalization as soon as possible. Chair, last week during SAPSTA 26, we heard how the Secretariat is overburdened with administrative challenges and stretched with limited capacity to fulfill all the requests made to them. We would like to bring to the attention of the parties some of the challenges that, if not addressed, will compromise expected responsibilities of the Secretariat as the global coordinating entity. Some of these areas include project management, mobilization of adequate resources, allocation and monitoring of resources to support capacity building initiatives, technological transfer, which is highly specialized and cannot be limited to coordination. And we are aware in the past years, this function has been supported by BioBridge, which has limited and insufficient seed funding of about $25,000. And lastly, managing the dual role of a player and referee, as the Secretariat still has to provide oversight in monitoring implementation of the work and the subsequent performance evaluation. In consideration of paragraph 8, South Africa looks forward to measures that will be put in place to ensure that the Secretariat addresses these challenges and limitations speedily, including a consideration by the Secretariat to partner with other international organizations that have experience in resource mobilization, coupled with experience to support capacity building and technology transfer, amongst others. Chair, whilst we recognize the cost effectiveness of having the Secretariat as the global coordinating entity as suggested by the informal advisory group, we would have encouraged testing of the criteria for suitability of the Secretariat. South Africa is in full support of paragraph 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17 as presented in this current document. We strongly support the invitation to the GEF, including through the GBFF, to support technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, and capacity building support program, and activities proposed by the sub-regional technical and scientific cooperation centers in response to requests by parties in their respective sub-regions to support the implementation of the GBF. In conclusion, we have made proposal on the text, on the draft recommendation, and are ready to engage further. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, South Africa. Indonesia, you have the floor.
Dear Chair, Indonesia appreciates the report prepared by the Secretariat of the CPD on cooperation with other conventions and international organizations and initiative in the implementation of Decision 15/13. Indonesia echoed the Lao PDR, the Philippines, and other parties to support Asian Center for Biodiversity, ACB, as a sub-regional support center in Asia. We reiterate the intervention from the Philippines in endorsement of selected regional and sub-regional technical and scientific support center. We also suggest that the Secretariat consider a balanced approach in selecting the regional support center, avoiding an over-reliance on any parent organizations, as stated on the document TSG/IAG/2024/1/2 in Annex Section 4, Para 2026, Para 22C, potential risk of dominance. We also support the CBD Secretariat to serve as the host for the global coordination entity, emphasizing the importance of executing this role with a strong commitment to cost effectiveness. Therefore, we suggest that any additional budget required for these expanded functions will be done effectively. We will submit our intervention to the Secretariat. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Indonesia. Lesotho, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. Lesotho supports the statement made by Egypt on behalf of Africa yesterday. Lesotho welcomes the adoption of a long-term strategic framework for capacity building and development to support priorities determined by parties in their national biodiversity strategies and action plans for the implementation of the global biodiversity framework. We believe the framework for capacity building is an essential tool for strengthening knowledge management and to guide the capacity enhancement initiatives for the implementation of the GBF targets. The effective implementation of NBSAP requires capacity building for stakeholders that are involved in the implementation of NBSAPs and GBF targets. Mr. Chair, Lesotho recognizes the progress made by the informal advisory group to consider draft elements of possible indicators for monitoring progress of the long-term strategic framework for capacity building and the development of the technical and scientific cooperation mechanism in accordance with Decision 15/8. I submit. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lesotho. Peru, you have the floor, please.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Chair. Peru supports the statement made by Cuba on behalf of GRULAC. We would like to thank the work carried out by the informal advisory group on scientific and technical information. We would also welcome the evaluation selection of the technical scientific support centers. It's important for them to have, as soon as possible, operationalization of these centers and to accelerate the mobilization of resources from donors for them, to ensure that they can start to provide support to parties in the implementation of the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. In addition, since this is the facilitation mechanism to support implementation of the mechanism, Peru would ask for help from the Secretariat to aid in this. We also need new indicators on capacity building and development as set out by the advisory group in order to share information. This support to the central portal for the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework will promote synergy and coordination and programmatic cooperation. Peru has a platform for the management of information on traditional knowledge administered by the National Institute of Defense of Protection of Intellectual Property, which hosts more than 6,000 registers of traditional knowledge related to biodiversity. We also like to express and take note of the statement made by Mexico to share their experience in strengthening capacities on information mechanisms. Peru thinks we need to have a biodiversity information system as a priority. Therefore, we agree with Mexico on the fact that there is a lot of information on standards and inputs available in order to create this type of mechanism for the management of information and the management of knowledge. Peru also welcomes the activities and programs for capacity building set up by the Secretariat of the CBD and with the UNCCD Secretariat and other related organizations in order to strengthen the comprehensive and complementary and synergistic implementation of the conventions and the Sustainable Development Goals at the national level. To conclude, we would like to support the declaration of Costa Rica, Mexico, and the Philippines. Thank you.
Señor Presidente.
Thank you, Peru. Friends, I will now invite interventions from observers. Statements will be limited to 3 minutes. If any organization is speaking on behalf of a stakeholder group, kindly say so at the beginning of your intervention. Again, I request that statements be focused on concrete suggestions. I will offer parties to the opportunity to support proposals made by the observers. IPLCs, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity, IIFB. The IIFB appreciates the program to develop a knowledge management component that emphasizes the importance to respect the indigenous peoples and local communities' rights and their traditional knowledge only accessed with the respect of their free, prior, and informed consent. The IIFB suggests that all related text is maintained. We recognize the importance of creation of informal advisory group on technical and scientific cooperation that provides strategic advice on concrete measures, tools, and opportunities, and we call for the continued work with full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and local communities. IIFB has following text proposals. In document CBD/SBI/4/7, in number 3, long-term and monitoring of strategic framework for development and capacity building and the technical and scientific cooperation mechanism, we add 2 new indicators. After indicator A, we add B. For B, we request to add number of countries that include indigenous peoples and local communities, women, youth participation in development of the NBSAPs. After K, we add indicator L, number and type of technologies transferred to indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth. At the end of paragraph 29, add more capacity building and participation in the clearinghouse mechanism, considering the needs, characteristics, and the priorities of indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth. Recommendations: technical and scientific cooperation and technology transfer. For paragraph 4, after relevant stakeholders, we request to add indigenous people and local communities, women and youth. And in the same paragraph, after technology and innovation, we request to add traditional knowledge, innovations, and practices. In the clearinghouse mechanism, after collaborations with parties, we request to add indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth. In 9B, after relevant organizations, we request to add indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth, and their initiatives, which is culturally appropriate. In the knowledge management section, in number 6, after relevant organizations, we request to add indigenous peoples and local communities and youth and their initiatives. For 7B in knowledge management, after relevant organizations, we request to add indigenous peoples and local communities. And in the same paragraph, after the capacities of parties, we request to add indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youths. Under the paragraph 40, capacity building and development, after relevant organizations, we request to add including indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth. In the annex section, operational modalities and procedures, in C, after the support to parties, we request to add indigenous peoples and local communities, women, youth, and indigenous traditional knowledge systems. In the selection of the host of the global coordination entity, after multiple stakeholders, we request to add indigenous peoples and local communities, women, and youth. In number 11, after related knowledge, we request to add including traditional knowledge, innovations, and practices. Finally, we take this opportunity to reiterate our willingness to collaborate with various bodies set up to participate in the implementation of KMGBF at national, regional, and local levels. We look forward to continuing work of implementing the KMGBF and CBD as a whole. We thank the parties for their considerations and look forward to their support. We will send the statement to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, IPLCs. Now I offer the parties the opportunity to support the proposals, changes, additions proposed by IPLC. Yeah. Egypt, DRC, Pakistan, Cote d'Ivoire, Zimbabwe, Mexico and Peru. Okay. Thank you. Women, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the CBD Women Caucus. To ensure the full, inclusive, and effective participation of women in capacity building and knowledge exchange, as well as in scientific and technical cooperation, it is imperative to adopt gender-responsive guidelines and procedures, which should involve indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and youth. Regional and sub-regional technical and scientific support centers must prioritize gender equality and gender and women's empowerment as key elements in their operation and outreach, thereby ensuring the full, inclusive, and effective participation of women.
Go slow, please.
For sure.
Speak slowly, please.
To ensure this, we suggest the following modification in the documents SBI/4/7. In Section 7, Recommendation, in capacity building in subparagraph 2A, add, after relevant organizations, indigenous people, local communities, women, and youth. And after parties, add stakeholders and all right holders. In technical and scientific operation and technology transfer, at the end of subparagraph 2, after support centers, add ensuring environmental and social safeguards. In knowledge management, subparagraph 7B, after capacities of parties, add indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and youth. In the annex of document 4/7/add1, in subparagraph 2A, after promote and facilitate, add equitable. And in subparagraph 2D, after partner organization, add indigenous peoples, local communities, women, youth, partner organization, and other stakeholders. In the annex of document 4/7/add2, in 2 components, paragraph 4, after local communities, add women, youth. In 3 principles, paragraph 6, after other governments, add indigenous people, local communities, women, youth. And after learning from experience, add and diverse knowledge systems, and after to improve, add policies. In paragraph 7, after local communities, add women, youth. In 4, purpose, subparagraph 12C, after among, add subnational. And after monitoring, add evaluation. In 7, monitoring, paragraph 18, after will be monitored, add add subnational. After Paris, add indigenous people, local communities, women, and youth. After knowledge management efforts at the, add subnational. And after provide support to Paris, add indigenous people, local communities, women, and youth. In 8 strategic objectives in the table under main actors, always add women and youth after local communities. We would like the chair to ask parties to show support to our consideration. Thank you so much.
Thank you, CBD Women's Caucus. I offer parties the opportunity to support the proposals made by Women Caucus, please. Cote d'Ivoire, DRC, Dominican Republic, Egypt, Comoros, Peru, no, not Peru, sorry, Benin, Chile, Cameroon, no, this one, Central African Republic, thank you, thank you. Youth, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. We support the statements of IIFB and the Women Caucus. Let me start with a question. How many of you know the publication of CBD in a nutshell? This flagship publication from GYBN is a useful overview of the CBD processes and has helped not just numerous young people, but also new party delegation members join the process and get a clearer understanding of how the CBD works. This is just one of the many examples that shows the important role of young people for capacity building and development, knowledge collection and sharing. In this sense, young people are both data providers and data recipients in the development of a biodiversity knowledge management system. We thank the Informal Advisory Group on Technical and Scientific Cooperation for their support on this important topic, and overall welcome the current draft decision, including the process towards establishing the regional and all the sub-regional support centers as the one-stop service center for parties, but also for indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth. In the document, CBD SBI 4.7 adds to on the knowledge management strategy, we propose to include women and youth or indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth in paragraph 7 and in the table section of section 8 in the column of component actions in strategic objective B, action 4, and strategic objective E, action 3, as well as in several places under the column of main actors. The specific lines will be in the written statement. Finally, in order to ensure the global coordination entity of the technical and scientific cooperation mechanism will be able to fulfill its role as established in Decision 5.8 Annex 2, we want to propose 2 additional sub-paragraphs that read, Paragraph 8 FBs, modalities that ensure the application of the principles of mutual respect, equality, and mutual benefit, a human rights-based approach, including respect for diverse knowledge systems, as well as a respect for the free, prior, informed consent related to the guiding principles 2.1 and 2.n in Part B of that decision. And also, another subparagraph is paragraph 8 F***, guidelines for ensuring the incorporation of continuous education and learning opportunities, including interdisciplinary education, in relation to the guiding principle 2K. We kindly ask parties to support this intervention. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, youth. Now I offer the parties the opportunity to support, please. Chile, Philippines, Peru, Democratic Republic of Congo, Bangladesh, Comoros, Central African Republic, Cote d'Ivoire. Thank you. NGOs at microphone number 236. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the CBD Alliance. If we achieve an ambitious global biodiversity framework with an effective monitoring framework, these achievements will be in vain if parties cannot implement it because of lack of capacity, appropriate technology transfer, technology assessment, and holistic knowledge management. The CBD Alliance reminds parties on the importance of the second objective of the mechanism to strengthen technical and scientific cooperation in support of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which is to enable technology assessment and monitoring of appropriate technologies. We would like this objective to be reflected in the COP recommendation. We would also like to stress the importance of an inclusive and participatory knowledge management for the implementation of the KMGBF. This means that not only parties should be subject to capacity development and knowledge management, but also rights holders who are implementing biodiversity actions on the ground and provide the most important data to assess the effectiveness of global and national biodiversity policies. Therefore, we have the following text suggestions. Under capacity building and development, add the wording including technology assessment in paragraphs 1 and 2a. Under technical and scientific cooperation and technology transfer, on the CHAPU, add a paragraph reaffirming in accordance with Article 16 of the Convention that technologies that are assessed and transferred need to be relevant to the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity or make use of genetic resources and do not cause significant damage to the environment and human health. On paragraph 9, after specialized expertise, add including for technology assessment. Under knowledge management, in paragraph 7b, add after parties and indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth. We will submit our proposals in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, NGO. Speaking on behalf of CBD Alliance, I now offer parties the opportunity to support. Zimbabwe, am I correct? Yeah. Benin, Egypt, Ecuador, Peru. Yeah, thank you. IUCN, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Considering the importance of capacity building and development for the implementation of the biodiversity plan, IUCN encourages parties to include the identified capacity needs and, where possible, capacity development plans in the revision of the NBSUPs. Chair, 4 IUCN regional offices, the IUCN Center for Mediterranean Cooperation, the Office for Eastern Europe and Central Asia, the Regional Office for West Asia, and the Asia Regional Office, representing consortia of organizations, have been recommended by the Informal Advisory Group to host the regional and sub-regional technical and scientific cooperation support centers. IUCN is committed to collaborating with the entities selected and the Global Coordination Entity to ensure comprehensive geographical coverage and to leverage each other's skills and expertise while avoiding duplication. We look forward to hearing about the final selection of the support centers in the next days. Finally, IUCN welcomes the updated draft of the knowledge management strategy, We recognize that the document has matured significantly and appreciate, in particular, the shift from a GBF knowledge management component to a standalone strategy. IUCN has participated in the peer review process and stands ready to support the implementation. Indeed, our own knowledge management strategy will align closely with this one. Thank you.
Thank you, IUCN. GBIF, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. First, we warmly welcome and endorse the interventions of Mexico and Guatemala with regard to national membership of GBIF to support implementation of the framework. GBIF welcomes the draft recommendation relating to capacity building and development, technical and scientific cooperation, the CHM, and knowledge management. However, we feel that as presently worded, the recommendation fails to emphasize the connections between these various mechanisms in supporting implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, with the risk that actions become siloed within each category. We would therefore suggest introducing a chapeau paragraph at the start of the draft COP decision along the following lines, quote, recognizing the importance of coordinated action on capacity building and development, technical and scientific cooperation, and technology transfer, the clearinghouse mechanism, and knowledge management in supporting implementation of targets 20 and 21 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, end quote. With regard to capacity building and development, GBIF looks forward to renewing its Biodiversity Information for Development programme with funding from the European Union to support the mobilization, access and use of primary biodiversity data in developing countries, directly supporting both targets 20 and 21 of the framework. We look forward to working with the selected regional and or sub-regional technical and scientific support centres, ensuring that the experience and tools developed by GBIF are available to support the mandate of these centres, especially on facilitating access to and utilisation of available scientific knowledge, information and data. Finally, GBIF stands ready to continue its support to the Secretariat and parties in providing the best tools and formats to ensure seamless access to species-level data through the clearinghouse mechanism, both through national or regional platforms using the BioLand tool and at global level. We will provide our suggested text in writing with this statement and respectfully invite support from parties. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, GBIF. I now offer parties the opportunity to support Australia, Guatemala, Mexico. Thank you. Thank you. I see a request from an academic or research organization at microphone number 261. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm taking the floor on behalf of the Federation of German Scientists. In order to ensure that the mechanism to strengthen technical and scientific cooperation will indeed help to implement the GBF, structures and measures need to be set up not only for technology transfer, but also for technology assessment and the capacity to do so. This was recognized by parties in Decision 15.8, calling to enable technology assessment Yet, we do not see this reflected in the current recommendations, which so far fail to operationalize technology assessment and in particular capacity building for technology assessment. This needs to be rectified. Please let me underline from the scientific perspective the importance of the technology assessment in the process of decision-making, without which informed decisions cannot be made. A technology assessment is an extended process that studies and evaluates a new or specific technology in order to understand its value, its appropriateness, its positive and negative impacts, and its effectiveness. For new technologies, it will also address how such a technology may unfold in the future and what the consequences could be. It will also compare the technology under investigation to existing technologies and approaches. Such information is vital for a country to make right choices as to which technology it wants to utilize or approve, and whether they could enhance or obstruct the targets of the GBF. It is equally important that the country has the capacity to undertake such assessments themselves, as outcomes are often country-specific. We want to call on parties to operationalize capacity building for technology assessment, as well as to provide sufficient funding for such capacity building. It will also be important to establish a dedicated space in the clearinghouse mechanism for technology assessment, including assessments carried out by parties. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, academic and research organizations. Thank you. Friends, I see no more requests from the floor. Thank you very much, delegates, for sharing your views. delegates, this concludes our consideration of agenda item 5A. Thank you for your interventions. I see there is convergence of a number of issues. However, there are a few areas where I also heard divergent views, and I will therefore propose to establish a contact group to resolve these differences. The focus of the contact group will be to resolve matters related to the modalities to operationalize the global coordination entity of the technical and scientific cooperation mechanism, and to resolve the elements of the draft decision, including those related to the hosting of the global coordination entity. The contact group will meet for one session and will be co-chaired by Mafotso Kalembo of Malawi and Holly Kelly Vale of the United Kingdom. And I thank them sincerely for agreeing to take up this responsibility. We intend to have the first session this evening. Could I also remind all parties to upload their written statements? I have seen that some parties who have spoken but not yet done so. This I am repeating because we want to take all statements, all opinions into consideration. Further, I would like to inform all of you that on the non-contentious issues, I intend to prepare a conference room paper. Distinguished delegates, we will now move on to item 5B, Draft Capacity Building and Development Action Plan for the Nagoya Protocol. I will ask the Secretariat to introduce this item. Secretariat, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. The Conference of the Parties, serving as the meeting of the parties to the Nagoya Protocol, in its decision Nagoya Protocol 4/7, requested the Executive Secretary to revise, in consultation with parties, the strategic framework for capacity building and development to support the effective implementation of the protocol, taking into account the findings of its evaluation and aligning it with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, as well as the long-term strategic framework for capacity building and development adopted by the Conference of Parties at its 15th meeting. In light of the above, the Secretariat has prepared document CBD/SPI/4/8. Section 2 of this note presents an overview of the elements considered in the draft capacity building and development action plan for the Nagoya Protocol. Section 3 presents elements of a recommendation for consideration by the subsidiary body on implementation. The draft action plan is contained in the annex to the present note. In addition, the Secretariat has prepared an information document, CBD/SPI/4/INF/3, which contains additional information supporting and relevant to the implementation of the capacity building and development action plan for the Nagoya Protocol. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. I now open the floor for interventions on agenda item 5B. As this item is under the Nagoya Protocol, I will give priority in the list of speakers to parties to the protocol. Egypt, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of the African Group, Egypt is honored to address item 5B on capacity building and development action plan for the Nagoya Protocol. Africa emphasizes that the Nagoya Protocol is instrumental in ensuring fair and equitable sharing of benefit arising from the use of genetic resources. Africa notes with concern that we have not achieved much on benefit sharing, which has negatively impacted the other two objectives of the Convention on Biological Diversity, namely conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. Africa further emphasizes that capacity building action plan for the Nagoya Protocol should be dynamic, evolving documents that address the specific need of developing parties. Continuous assessment, resource mobilization, implementation, and evaluation of the crucial step for the success of this plan and for fully realizing the protocol potential. Africa highlights that the action plan should prioritize strengthening legal and institutional framework to support compliance with the Nagoya Protocol, enhancing the capacity of national focal point and competent authority to effectively implement access and benefit sharing measures, fostering collaborative research and development initiatives that value and incorporate traditional knowledge, and ensuring that capacity building efforts are context-specific, inclusive, and gender-responsive. We urge the international community to mobilize financial and technical resources to support this effort, fostering a cooperative environment where all nations can thrive. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Egypt. The parties in queue are Switzerland, Brazil, European Union. Switzerland, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very happy for once to be very positive and announce that Switzerland can support the proposed capacity building and development action plan for the Nagoya Protocol. Switzerland also is in favor of the expansion of the mandate of the Informal Advisory Group on capacity building for the implementation of the protocol to include advice on issues more generally related to the implementation of the protocol. Finally, Switzerland supports the invitation to parties and others to publish all relevant information on access and benefit sharing clearinghouse. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Switzerland. Brazil, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Brazil appreciates the capacity building and development action plan for the Nagoya Protocol as contained in Annex to document CBD/SBI/4/8. We would suggest minor amendments to improve clarity and enhance consistency with the provisions of the Nagoya Protocol. Under Outcome Area 4, we would suggest a specific activity on supporting training activities to enhancing the capacity of women within indigenous peoples and local communities in relation to access to genetic resources and/or traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources, in line with Article 22, paragraph 5J of the protocol. We are highly supportive of Outcome Area 5, which improves understanding of the role of access and benefit sharing to foster innovation across different sectors and support sustainable development. We would suggest an additional action to support the joint development and transfer of technology related to the utilization of generic resources, in particular with developing country parties, within Outcome 5.3. At the same time, we believe that some examples under Output 5.5, such as biodiverse supply chains, certification schemes, and branding, would still require further discussions, and we would suggest not to include those examples at this stage. We would express similar concerns regarding the concept of user-friendliness as suggested under Output 2.5. Regarding the draft decision, we believe the actions proposed under Paragraph 7 on mobilizing financial resources should be consistent with Articles 22 and 25 of the Protocol. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. Friends, there is a list. We have to cross-check it, so bear with minor delays, please. European Union, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you that you give also words to the regional groups, which are normally first before parties. I speak on behalf of the European Union and its 27 member states. The EU and its member states thank the Secretariat for this draft capacity building and development action plan for the Nagoya Protocol, which contains crucial elements for the effective implementation of the protocol, especially in developing countries. We also thank the Secretariat for the draft recommendation, which we support overall. In particular, we support the foreseen expansion of the mandate of the Informal Advisory Committee on Capacity Building for the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol, and would like to suggest to extend its mandate until the 7th meeting of the Conference of the Parties, serving as the meeting of the parties to the Nagoya Protocol. The EU and its member states would like to introduce relevant COP16 decisions that have a relationship with this agenda item, such as the monitoring framework of the Kunming-Montreal global biodiversity framework, capacity building and development, and technical and scientific cooperation, the clearinghouse mechanism, knowledge management, and reporting and review decisions. We further welcome the establishments of the regional and sub-regional technical and scientific cooperation support centers and would like to encourage them to consider the action plan for capacity building and development for the Nagoya Protocol in their work. We also propose to add these centers to the list of actors to promote and use the CEPA toolkit. Lastly, we would like to request the Secretariat to report on the activities undertaken towards the action plan for the consideration of COPMOP 7. We will submit our textual proposals in writing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, European Union. Friends, little bit, small disruption. Those who want to those who want to speak on behalf of regional groups, if they raise their hands, I can spell out. So therefore, accordingly, the time this will be fixed by the. So, are there any parties speaking on behalf of regional groups? If they raise hands, I will be very thankful. In that case, I'll invite the parties one by one. Kindly just bear for 1 minute. Philippines, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Philippines welcomes the draft Capacity Building and Development Action Plan for the Nagoya Protocol, set out in document SBI/4/8. Mr. Chair, the said plan is a necessary template for action to guide parties to the Nagoya Protocol to enhance their implementation of the protocol while taking into account recent international developments that further institutionalize access and benefit sharing concepts, principles, and instruments in related areas, such as the UN High Seas Treaty or the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction BBNJ Treaty, as well as the forthcoming WHO Convention, Agreement, or other international instrument on pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. With these developments, parties to the Nagoya Protocol need to understand how to implement the protocol alongside these instruments. In addition, the government agencies implementing these institutions also need to understand the protocol, like what the Philippines recently did with its interaction with its health ministry counterparts, is struggling to understand what the Nagoya Protocol is all about. In the interest of time, the Philippines will submit to the Secretariat its proposal for refining Annex 2 of document SBI/4/8. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Philippines. United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. The UK thanks the Executive Secretary for the note on the draft Capacity Building and Development Action Plan for the Nagoya Protocol, and also thanks the Informal Advisory Committee for their guidance in its development. Effective capacity building and development activities are of central importance to ensuring the Nagoya Protocol meets its objectives. Through capacity building programs such as the Darwin Initiative, the UK is committed to ensuring the protocol is implemented in a way that facilitates access to genetic resources and enables benefits to flow. We do, however, have a number of comments on the draft decision. Although we support the expansion of the mandate of the informal advisory committee, we would like to ensure that the current membership remains fit for purpose. In this regard, we would suggest the membership is reviewed in light of the broader mandate of the committee. Furthermore, we understand that the committee has provided comments on the draft action plan, but there was no subsequent review process. We would therefore suggest that the Executive Secretary make good use of the expertise available within the IAC and, where appropriate, hold virtual meetings to seek additional input. We recognise that the Executive Secretary is requested to undertake a significant programme of work as part of this decision, and that their capacity to take on new activities is limited. We would therefore suggest that the review and update of material in paragraph 10D is subject to the availability of resources, and that the activities listed in paragraphs 10A, B, and C take priority. Lastly, within the annex and regarding the listed outputs, we would suggest removing reference to minimum requirements for mutually agreed terms. We understand that mutually agreed terms are predominantly developed as part of private contracts between providers and users, and that each agreement is unique. We would therefore suggest that mutually agreed terms retain their flexibility and can be developed in a way that best suits the needs of both parties. We will submit our comments in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, United Kingdom. South Africa, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. South Africa aligned with the statement made by Egypt on behalf of the Africa Group. South Africa commends the Executive Secretary for preparing a revised strategic framework for capacity building and development to support the effective implementation of the protocol in line with the Global Biodiversity Framework and the long-term strategic framework for capacity building and development to support the implementation of the framework, as well as incorporating elements of awareness, raising strategy into the strategic framework for capacity building and development for the protocol. South Africa appreciates the support from governments who actively contributed during the meetings of the Informal Advisory Committee on Capacity Building for the implementation of the protocol. South Africa welcomes the Capacity Building and Development Action Plan for the Nagoya Protocol as it provides guidance on the design of capacity building and development initiative at the global, regional, and sub-regional and national levels to support the effective implementation of the protocol, including the development of capacity building and development plans on access and benefit sharing as part of the national biodiversity strategies and action plans. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, South Africa. Japan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding item 5B, in order to achieve effective implementation of the Nagoya Protocol, we consider it is necessary that national laws and regulations concerning the provision of opportunities to acquire genetic resources and traditional knowledge related to genetic resources should be developed and implemented with legal certainty and clarity and transparency in developing country parties and others. And that capacity building and enhancement for this purpose is important. In this regard, Japan supported the implementation of the protocol through the Nagoya Protocol Implementation Fund, the Japan Biodiversity Fund, as well as the Global Environment Facility. Japan generally supports the draft recommendations, but we would like to have some clarifications, including on how, who will be the implementing body for the indicators described in the enclosure. We're looking forward to further discussions on this agenda item during this meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Japan. Burkina Faso, you have the floor, please.
Monsieur le Président,
Chair, Burkina Faso formally aligns itself with the statements made by Egypt on behalf of the African group on this item of the agenda. We welcome the desire to take into account many parameters in developing the capacity building and development action plan for the Nagoya Protocol. Burkina Faso recognizes that the success of the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol rests in part on cooperation and coordination among stakeholders. The present note has clearly underlined this by saying that the limited number of capacity building service providers in the field of access and benefit sharing constitutes a major obstacle to the implementation of the action plan. In this regard, Burkina Faso welcomes the capacity building initiative for benefit sharing access set out by the GIZ for capacity building. In addition to what has been requested by Egypt on behalf of the African group, Burkina Faso requests that the action plan be inclusive, participatory, and dedicate a good section to the mobilization of service providers for capacity building in the field of access and benefit sharing. We urge the action plan to take into account capacity building of developing countries in the field of the omics sciences and bioinformatics. In this case, digital sequencing on genetic resources. We ask finally for the mobilization of financial and technical resources to ensure the full functioning of the bodies under the Nagoya Protocol, in particular checkpoints, in order to guarantee the achievement of the two other goals of the Convention on Biological Diversity. Our proposed amendments to the text are set out in the annex to our statement, which will be uploaded to the site of the Convention. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Burkina Faso. I just will speak out the parties to the Nagoya Protocol which are in queue. Kenya, Mexico, India, Argentina, Uganda, Cote d'Ivoire, Indonesia. Kenya, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kenya aligns itself on behalf of, on the statement read by Egypt on behalf of Africa. Chair, Kenya appreciates efforts by parties, organizations, and development partners in implementing the capacity building strategic plan for the Nagoya Protocol. At the same time, Kenya notes the need for reviewing and developing the capacity building framework based on experiences and lessons learned while aligning it with the global biodiversity framework. Whereas the current capacity building has been more on ratification and awareness creation, there is a need to consider capacity building guidance provided under Article 22 of Nagoya Protocol on human resource, institutional, and development of effective domestic measures. Kenya requests the Secretariat in this regard to include measurable activities with clear outcomes, and clear monitoring strategies in the revised framework, focusing on access, utilization, technology transfer, incentives, and benefit sharing related to conservation and sustainability. Further, Kenya requests incorporation of technology transfer and emerging issues such as contracts, compliance, digital sequence information, synthetic biology in capacity building efforts. Lastly, Kenya encourages parties to align the NPSAPs with the revised capacity building framework for the Nagoya Protocol and integrate them into national planning and budgeting processes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Kenya. Mexico, you have the floor, please.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Mexico welcomes the fact that in the action plan for capacity building for the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol, it establishes that its design and implementation should be based on the analysis and assessment of national contexts, actors, capacities, and existing needs. Therefore, it's essential to ensure that there's regulation which is adequate for access to and benefit sharing on genetic resources. In this regard, Mexico recognizes the importance of the role of indigenous peoples as possessors of genetic resources, also recognizing their central role in reverting current trends in deterioration of ecosystems. We think that the action plan for capacity building to implement the Nagoya Protocol should have strategies which guarantee at all moments the rights of indigenous peoples, ensuring their participation, full and effective participation, and their free, prior and informed consent for decision-making related to access to and use of genetic resources and traditional knowledge associated with them. Mexico also believes that it's still necessary to include special provisions for countries who have the origins of domesticated species. On cooperation and coordination of involved parties, the action plan for capacity building has an ample opportunity to involve various stakeholders in actions and strategies. Nevertheless, Mexico believes it's important to signal that these stakeholders need to be free from conflicts of interest. Thank you, Chair. And we will send our specific proposed amendments in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mexico. India, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. India welcomes the adoption of Capacity Building and Development Action Plan for the Nagoya Protocol. The action plan aims to support the effective implementation of the Nagoya Protocol and contributes to the implementation of targets 13 and 20 of the KMJBF. We would like to state that action plan should aim to create capacity building for effective implementation of the Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing mechanism through multi-stakeholder and interagency coordination at the national level, and identify new innovative financial resources for implementing the protocol for fulfilling the targets under KMJBF. We would like to state that regional and sub-regional support networks or centers proposed under long-term framework may be engaged in this exercise to provide guidance to the parties for implementation of Capacity Development Action Plan, particularly for monitoring and utilization of genetic resources, namely user country measures and resource mobilization. Providing training to the parties on the BioLand tool and its effective use, and for strengthening of the National Clearing House mechanism. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, India. Argentina, you have the floor, please.
Chair, distinguished delegates, Argentina welcomes the opportunity to speak on this important item of the agenda. On the draft recommendation on Capacity Building and Development Action Plan for the Nagoya Protocol, we would like to highlight a few key points. First of all, we propose an action plan which is concise and focused on Article 22 of the Nagoya Protocol. It's essential that measures are focused on capacity building, which enables parties to effectively implement the protocol. This approach should consider specific national priorities and circumstances, including the form of governance, which in some cases might require differentiated courses of action. The capacity to adapt to local realities is essential for the success of the implementation of the protocol. Argentina, as a federal country, faces the particular challenge of setting out implementation at both national and provincial level. In this regard, It's essential to create capacities at the national level and also in the provinces so that they can play an active and effective role in the implementation of the protocol. Only through efficient coordination and adequate capacity building can we guarantee a uniform and effective implementation of the protocol throughout the Argentine territory. In addition, Argentina underlines the importance of the provision of adequate and sufficient means of implementation. The implementation of the action plan for parties which are developing countries will depend on the availability of means of implementation. These need to be timely, adequate, and predictable, including financial resources. It's essential that these resources be accessible and aligned with the specific needs of each country, thereby enabling each country to comply with its obligations under the protocol in an effective manner. Argentina will send its comments and amendment proposals in writing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Argentina. Uganda, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Uganda aligns with the position of Africa region as presented by Egypt in regards to the capacity building and development action plan for the Nagoya Protocol. We acknowledge the note prepared by Secretariat and particular links to the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, the long-term strategic framework for capacity building and development to support the implementation of the framework and Sustainable Development Goal 7. We recommend that the plan should underscore effective capacity building measures for implementing the Nagoya Protocol to strongly ensure fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from utilization of genetic resources and associated traditional knowledge. Uganda calls for continued assessment of capacity building and development needs and priorities in development of capacity building and development plans on access and benefits sharing. We wish to request that the plan should adequately reflect approaches to strengthen capacity to undertake biodiversity-based research and development, negotiation of mutually agreed terms, domestic, legislative, administrative, or policy measures, specifically with reference to access and benefit sharing. And while doing this, we hope that the whole of society and government approach is undertaken while furthering the review of the plan. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you, Uganda. Cote d'Ivoire, you have the floor.
Merci.
Thank you so much, Chair, for giving us the floor. Cote d'Ivoire wishes to back the position voiced by Africa as expressed by Egypt. Sir, the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol continues to pose challenges for a great many countries, including Cote d'Ivoire. Amongst these challenges, we have issues of capacity building and strengthening. In order to find solutions to the challenge of capacity building, my country takes note of the report of the Informal Advisory Committee on capacity building for the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol on its 5th meeting. We support the proposal to broaden the mandate of the Informal Advisory Committee to now include the provision of advice on issues, on more general issues related to the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol, to advice on issues related to capacity building and strengthening, awareness raising, and assessment and review under the protocol. Côte d'Ivoire welcomes the action plan for capacity building for the Nagoya Protocol, which supports the development of effective capacity building measures for the implementation of the protocol, thus contributing to the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising from the use of genetic resources and associated traditional knowledge, as well as to the implementation of Target 13 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Côte d'Ivoire applauds the inclusiveness of all actors involved in capacity building and strengthening, as well as the cooperation and the coordination of stakeholders. We welcome the fact that elements of the awareness-raising strategy have been taken into account in Result 6, as well as other results of the action plan. We note that both International and national funding and capacity building for the parties are all required for its implementation. This is why Côte d'Ivoire cherishes the hope of seeing the Global Environment Facility provide effective support to the parties for the implementation of the aforementioned plan. We'd like to thank the initiative for strengthening the APA for its support to Côte d'Ivoire. And lastly, sir, Côte d'Ivoire, my country, welcomes the decision to assess its implementation and requests the Executive Secretary to make available the necessary international funding sources which are available and the various procedures for accessing them. Sir, I thank you.
Thank you, Côte d'Ivoire. Indonesia, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Indonesia would like to express our sincere appreciation for the proposed draft capacity building and development action plan for the Nagoya Protocol prepared by the Secretariat. We are pleased to inform you that our national development plan is closely aligned with the objective of the Nagoya Protocol. At present, Indonesia is actively promoting the research and development of genetic resources, including the establishment of access and benefit sharing mechanism for genetic resources and traditional knowledge as articulated in our draft National Medium-Term Development Plan 2025 and 2029. We believe that this action plan can serve as a valuable reference in the preparation of capacity building initiative and the enhancement of the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol in accordance with the priorities set by the parties. And I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Indonesia. Fiji, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Fiji supports the development of capacity building and development of an action plan for Nagoya Protocol set out in the document CBD-SPI/4/8, and we reiterate the importance of the action plan for the Nagoya Protocol, that it should be dynamic and should assist parties in meeting specific needs that build capacity for genetic resources and its equitable sharing of benefits that arises from the utilization of resources, as well as build parties' capability for clearinghouse mechanism. Through the protocol, we would like to see a strengthened policy and legislative capability of parties with systems, instruments, and clearly defined processes for better monitoring and compliance and implementation. An important element that Fiji would like to reiterate is the strengthening of the free, prior, informed consent FPIC process to ensure that due process of consideration, consultation, and regulatory approval processes is taking into account the resource owner's consent and equal benefit sharing. We thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Fiji. A little while ago, we have seen Kiribati on the screen. If you still want to come, I'll give the floor, please. Thank you. I see no more requests from the parties for the floor, and I will now invite interventions from observer organizations. Statements will be limited to 3 minutes. If any organization is speaking on behalf of a stakeholder group, kindly say so at the beginning of your intervention. I request that statements be focused on concrete suggestions. I will offer parties the opportunity to support proposals made by the observers. IPLCs, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of
the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity, IIFB. The IIFB welcomes the report contained in the CBD document SBI/4/8 on Capacity Building and Development Action Plan for the Nagoya Protocol. We appreciate the establishment of strategic framework for capacity building and development in the support of the effective implementation of the Nagoya Protocol, and the evaluation of this framework and the progress report on the implementation of previous decisions on capacity building and development. The IIFB calls on the parties to support for the full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and local communities, women, and youth in the capacity building development programs for the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol. IIFB recommends parties to support indigenous peoples and local communities with technical and financial resources for the elaboration of bicultural community protocols through culturally appropriate tools, methodologies, language, and adequate time. Regarding to the clearinghouse mechanisms, the IIFB would like to suggest to the CBD Secretariat to increase the indigenous peoples and local communities' full and effective participation, taking into consideration their orality, needs, and through community-based methodologies. IIFB makes the following recommendations. Encourage parties to support indigenous people and local communities with technical and financial resources for the elaboration of community protocols through culturally appropriate tools, methodologies, language, adequate time, and community-based methodologies. Request to the Secretariat to increase the capacity building development activities for indigenous people and local communities on the Nagoya Protocol, including on the clearinghouse mechanism. Finally, we would like to forward to continuing the work implementing the KMGBF and CBD as a whole. We thank the parties for their consideration and look forward to their support. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, IPLCs. I offer parties to the opportunity to support the recommendations, suggestions made by IPLCs. Cote d'Ivoire, Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, Mexico, Fiji, Central African Republic. We'll move. Thank you. What is her name? That she raised a hand, but I could not see the country's name. Fiji. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. CBD Women Caucus, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. I am speaking on behalf of the CBD Women Caucus. We, the women, request to be included in the crafting of capacity building and development plans on access and benefit sharing, and in the process of evaluation and review of the protocol, recognizing and empowering women in this context promotes gender justice, therefore strengthening the effective implementation of the protocol by respecting and valuing the unique contributions of women and aligning with the call to develop, test, and promote relevant methodologies to integrate gender perspectives in access and benefit sharing instruments as appropriate. To ensure this, we request the following edits in document CBD/SBI/4/8. On the recommendations of the subsidiary body on implementation, in paragraph 36, to include a new paragraph that reads, recalling decisions 15/4 and 15/11, which invites parties to develop, test, and promote relevant methodologies to ensure gender responsiveness in access and benefit sharing instruments as appropriate. In paragraph 2, include women, youth after local communities, removing it from the end of the paragraph. In paragraph 4, include women, youth after local communities, deleting it after relevant stakeholders, and include the word other before relevant stakeholders. In paragraph 5, 6, 10B, and 10C to include women, youth after local communities. We kindly request the Chair to ask parties to support. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, CBD Women's Caucus. I now offer opportunity to the parties to support the suggestions made by the Women's Caucus. Yeah. Cameroon, Bangladesh, Cote d'Ivoire, Morocco, Comoros, Ghana, thank you. Zambia, thank you.
And then
DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. Okay. Philippines, Peru, and last Dominican Republic, and last one. Okay, okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, delegates. I see no more requests for the floor. I also see that we have substantial agreement on this item, and therefore, with the assistance of the Secretariat, I shall prepare a conference room paper
just interrupt you.
yeah. Sorry, the ITPG RFA, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to address this session again on behalf of the International Treaty. Chair, distinguished delegates, the Secretariat of the International Treaty participated in the work of the Informal Advisory Committee on Capacity Building for the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol, and would like to thank the other members of the committee for the knowledge and experiences they shared in the process, as well as the CBD Secretariat for facilitating the work of the committee. In this brief statement, we would simply like to note that the draft Capacity Action Plan for the Nagoya Protocol, as contained in the Annex to Working Document 8, Section 12E, recognises as one of its guiding principles that synergies, mainstreaming, integration, and mutually supportive implementation with other international access and benefit-sharing instruments, such as the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, should be encouraged. Since the entry into force of the Nagoya Protocol, the Secretariat of the International Treaty has co-organised and directly promoted numerous capacity development events and activities with various international and national stakeholders, where mutually supportive implementation of the protocol and the international treaty featured as a prominent theme. With the new action plan under consideration, the Secretariat of the International Treaty would like to reaffirm its continuous commitment to cooperation on capacity building and development with all stakeholders of the protocol for a harmonious relationship between the two instruments. The harmonious relationship will enable a direct contribution by the International Treaty constituency to the relevant targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, ITPG RFA. I see that we have substantial agreement on this item, and therefore with the assistance of the Secretariat, I shall prepare a conference room paper for consideration in plenary. Friends, we have now reached the conclusion of our discussions on agenda item 5B. Distinguished delegates, we will now take up the agenda item 6 on communication, education, and public awareness. I will ask the Secretariat to introduce this agenda item. Secretariat, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. In its decision 1514, the Conference of the Parties requested the Executive Secretary to update the program of work on communication, education, and public awareness for the Convention on Biological Diversity and develop further guidance for its implementation at the national, subnational, and local levels for consideration by the subsidiary body at its 4th meeting and the Conference of the Parties at its 16th meeting. Under this agenda item in document CBD/SBI/4/9, a review is provided of the decisions of the Conference of the Parties outlining the implementation of the program of work on communication, education, and public awareness, and the strengths and shortcomings of the work undertaken. A recommendation on the future direction for activities in line with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework is presented in the annex to this document. The document contains a draft recommendation with suggested actions to align the program of work on communication, education, and public awareness with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. Colleagues, I will now invite interventions from the floor as under previous items. If there are any regional statements, I will take those first before inviting individual parties. Following the parties, we will hear from observers. I encourage all interventions to be focused on concrete suggestions on the draft recommendations. Statements on behalf of regional groups may be up to 5 minutes. Statements by parties will be limited to 3 minutes. I will now invite statements from the parties speaking on behalf of regional groups. Burkina Faso, you have the floor, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, sir. Burkina Faso has the pleasure of making this statement on behalf of the Africa region. Sir. Agenda item 6 tackles communication, awareness raising, and education, which are all essential to ensure that the public understands what is going on and to guarantee decision making which is wise and enlightened for the implementation of the convention and its protocols as well as the KMGBF. For this reason, we wish to convey our gratitude to the Secretariat for having produced document CBD/SBI/4/9. Sir, we are aware that enlightened decision-making is always the result of communication, awareness raising, and education. We have, however, learned that the process was not fit for purpose in the past, and this, of course, had an impact on the effective implementation of the objectives of the Convention on Biodiversity and all of its protocols. We could not, therefore, stress the urgent need for transformation in the field of communication, awareness raising, and education. This pressing need is clearly spelt out in the decision 15/4 of the COP, and we need to act to bring it to life. Africa wishes to reaffirm the importance of linking the updated program of work on communication, education, and awareness raising with the KMGBF, and back the fact that the Conference of Parties was invited to adopt a decision to update the program of work on communication, education, and awareness raising for the Convention on Biodiversity and all of its protocols. Africa also urges the Executive Secretariat to elaborate a global plan of action for education in terms of biodiversity with the support and cooperation of relevant organizations and stakeholders, especially international organizations, to implement and carry out effective communication, education, and awareness-raising activities. We believe that most of the actions which have been listed in the draft recommendation are relevant in terms of aligning the program of work on communication, education, and awareness-raising with the KMGBF, especially as far as sections K and C are concerned, paragraph 7, as well as targets 15, 16, and 21. We will submit comments in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Burkina Faso. European Union, you have the floor, please.
Dear Mr. Chair, I'm speaking on behalf of the EU and its 27 member states. The EU and its member states welcome the draft recommendation, taking into account the importance of updating the program of work for communication for the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. We support the proposal for developing an action plan on education and suggest that UNESCO and IUCN be invited to take the lead for this action plan, supported by the Secretariat. Regarding paragraph 2, the actions to align the program of work on communication, education, and public awareness with the framework, we look forward to discussing the plan here with a view to adopting it during COP. With regards paragraph 3, the EU and its member states propose to make the link to the reporting of the targets 15, 16, and 21 to make it clear towards which targets the parties should report. Paragraph 4 should be moved to the paragraph request the Executive Secretary, as normally all requests are regrouped in one specific request. We will propose a paragraph 7a and b to this effect. The Secretariat should also be asked to report on the activities undertaken. We will propose an additional paragraph 7c in this regard. Paragraph 8 should be deleted, as it is recalling a decision which already figures in the preambula. We will hand in our comments in writing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, European Union. Colleagues, if there are any parties speaking on regional groups, then the floor will be opened for them. Here I see on the screen Japan, Burundi, Ethiopia, Brazil. So therefore I wish to know whether they are speaking on behalf of regional groups or on individual capacity. So there are no further regional groups who would like to take the floor. Therefore, now the floor will be opened for the individual parties. The time limit will be 3 minutes. Japan, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Japan would like to take this opportunity to thank the CBD Secretariat for dedicated work on the program of work on communication, education, and public awareness. We believe that the alignment of the KMGBF and the work plan on communication, education, and public awareness in this recommendation is an important process for the achievement of the 2050 vision, and we would like to support the way to proceed. Japan has been making strong efforts in communication of biodiversity. For example, Japan prepared an image character called Daidaraposi to show an image of the future society in harmony with nature. Japan would like to continue our efforts in line with the program of work on CEPAS, especially in relation to Target 15. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Japan. The parties in queue are Burundi, Ethiopia, Brazil, Democratic Republic of Congo, Republic of Korea, Uganda. Burundi, you have the floor, please.
Merci, Monsieur. Thank you, sir. Burundi backs a statement of the Africa Group presented by Burkina Faso on communication, public awareness, and education. We also recognize the role of communication, public awareness, and education for public understanding and to inform all stakeholders to enable better decision-making for the implementation of the Convention and its protocols to achieve the goals of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and ensure the conservation, management, and sustainable use of biodiversity. For this reason, we back the recommendation to develop a global action plan for biodiversity education encompassing formal and informal education to support the transformative changes needed to implement the Global Biodiversity Framework. I thank you, sir.
Thank you, Burundi. Ethiopia, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ethiopia supports a statement made on item 6 by Burkina Faso on behalf of Africa. GBO5 underscores the impact of limited biodiversity awareness on global biodiversity decline. In response, decision 15/14 of the KMGBF of COP urges continued effort in updating the communication, education, and public awareness. Effective integration of transformative biodiversity education is crucial to address this issue, necessitating the collaborative effort across formal, non-formal, and informal educational platforms, especially in promoting curriculum on biodiversity at all levels. Accordingly, we request the Executive Secretary to collaborate with UNESCO and IUCN in developing a plan of action on biodiversity education and develop communication guidelines for each of the goals and targets so that parties will incorporate it into NBSAP of their GBF. Parties lacked capacity development and resource, resulting in weaker communication outcomes among many developing countries. We invite international organizations, businesses, and other relevant stakeholders to support implementation of the communication, education, and public awareness. Additionally, we recommend regular update of communication strategy to align with technological advancement, employing multidisciplinary approach to engage diverse social groups in biodiversity conservation. Successful case studies, innovative communication campaigns, and necessary legal frameworks are needed to further boost the global biodiversity conservation effort. Overall, the communication strategies have to emphasize the need for inclusive technology-driven political support and collaborative approach to raise awareness, inspire action, and mobilize support for global biodiversity conservation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ethiopia. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Brazil sees the value of developing a global plan of action for education on biodiversity, encompassing formal and informal education, given the role played by communication, education, and public awareness in driving the changes we need. To elaborate an effective plan of action, we are of the view that it should address the three objectives of the Convention in a balanced manner and be able to convey the important messages of the KEM-GBF on protection, conservation, and sustainable use of biodiversity to a wide range of stakeholders. We understand the importance of involving UNESCO in this important job, given its experience in education for sustainable development. Nevertheless, we would caution about singling out other bodies that are not international organizations, since it might not bring the balanced view that we envisage for the action plan. Furthermore, in order for such a plan to adequately reach all the stakeholders, it is important to take into account regional context as an essential part of messaging and outreach efforts. On the actions to align the program of work on communication, education, and public awareness with the KEM-GBF, we particularly welcome those aimed at showing how the three pillars of the Convention may contribute to improving sustainable livelihoods and poverty eradication efforts. We could further specify how this could be done in that same section, and will provide suggestions in that regard. We further noted that the draft recommendations highlight targets 15, 16, and 21 as being of particular importance in our communication efforts. While we agree with that selection, we believe that our target 9 should also be part of that list. We are convinced that an important component of target 9 resides in bringing visibility to the social, economic, and environmental benefits of biodiversity, and thus increasing the uptake of practices aimed at the protection and sustainable management and use of wild species, especially for those in vulnerable situations and those most dependent on biodiversity. In the same lines, enhancing awareness and appreciation of the customary use by indigenous and local communities is also an essential part of encouraging the maintenance of these sustainable practices. We'll be making concrete suggestions in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. Democratic Republic of Congo, you have the floor, please.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me the floor. I'd also like to thank you for the convivial spirits which you've instilled in the room. I think that's well appreciated, Chair. The Democratic Republic of the Congo supports a statement made by Burkina Faso on behalf of the African Group. Chair, we think that communication, education, and public awareness constitute the essential lungs for the success not just of the implementation of the global biodiversity framework, but also in achieving the goals of the Convention and its protocols. However, it's a shame to note that the majority of levels of society, starting by decision makers right down to people on the ground, including indigenous peoples and local communities, are not sufficiently informed of the issues of biodiversity. Therefore, it's really important to have a structural plan. So to have communication, education, and public awareness. We think that this is an area which is multi-stakeholder and needs to be cross-cutting. But perhaps we should focus in this document not really on specific targets, but focus on all targets of the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. When we look at the level of communication on climate change, I think we can see that in the field of biodiversity, a lot remains to be done. And perhaps IPBES could play an important role on the importance of communication and awareness raising as well when it comes to biodiversity. Chair, in paragraph 14 of the document, we can see that the educational work of the Secretariat has been conducted in partnership with UNESCO and has a material impact on the program and on partners in the context of education and development. But it's a shame that we're not made aware of this impact and we haven't seen it specifically. We're skeptical of placing UNESCO before this activity because we haven't been following their efforts or their participation in activities on biodiversity. DRC strongly recommends that we support environmental education programs at all levels and to increase practical and scientific policies, including interfaces, including biodiversity throughout sectors. Thank you.
Thank you. Democratic Republic of Congo. Republic of Korea, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. The Republic of Korea would first like to thank the Secretary for preparing the document on this important agenda item. We would also like to express our deep appreciation to all parties, the Secretariat, and stakeholders for their efforts to raise awareness of the importance of biodiversity. We believe that the successful implementation of the GBF must be accompanied by widespread communication, education, and awareness-raising activities to communicate the value of biodiversity to all members of society. However, as noted in paragraph 16 of the document, we fully recognize that there are areas for improvement in our previous efforts. In this regard, we generally support the content of the document and the draft decision. However, our delegation is concerned about whether the action plan in the annex adequately reflected the relevant elements of the GBF, in particular Target 10. We would like to reiterate the analysis in the Global Biodiversity Outlook 5 that realizing the 2050 vision for biodiversity depends on a portfolio of actions in the several areas. According to the GBO5, each of these areas of action relies on very substantial change and innovation implemented on a short time scale and involving a wide range of actors at all scales and across all sectors of society. The Republic of Korea also reflected this in the revised MBSAT, where the need to raise awareness in all parts of society is meaningfully recognized, especially agriculture, aquaculture, fisheries, forestry, and others, with regard to sustainable use of biological resources. We therefore propose to amend the relevant text in the annex of draft decision to include Target 10 in 11th paragraphs, including the preamble paragraph that begins with recognizing the importance of linking revision. And paragraph 1 and 48 of the annex. The proposed amendment has been submitted online. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Republic of Korea. Uganda, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Uganda aligns itself with the position of African region. Uganda commends the Secretariat for the note on communication, education, and public awareness, CBD/SBI/4/9. Uganda takes note of the implementation of the program of work, which has focused primarily on the actions that support communication, education, and awareness. We recognize that communication, education, and public awareness is critical for participation and decision-making with digital approaches. However, the local communities are limited in accessing digital communication. We commend that the parties should be supported with digital transformation approaches for information sharing and feedback. Uganda commends development of a global plan of action for education on biodiversity, with the support and resources to be provided by relevant organizations, parties, and international organizations for effective communication, education, and public awareness activities. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Uganda. Distinguished delegates, while thanking you for very proactive participation, I hereby adjourn the forenoon session now, and we will reassemble in the afternoon at the prescribed time, please. Thank you for your understanding and cooperation.